I'd just like to take a moment and sort of level set to a degree and build a little bit and amplify a little bit on what Sam and Lisa were talking about concerning Housing First. I'm not sure everybody in the room knows what Housing First is. If you think you know what Housing First is, would you raise your hands? Okay, so not everyone does. So let me try to explain it somewhat anecdotally in terms of my own journey, in terms of understanding Housing First, which that journey was from Leone to 125th Street in Bergen County, in Manhattan, from Bergen to Manhattan, only a couple miles away. Clark mentioned that I was asked to be the chair of the 10-year plan to end homelessness, which sounds Kremlin-like, the 10-year plan. And it was really my selection, so to speak, as chair of the 10-year plan was really defensive in its origin. I was then serving on the Human Services Advisory Council for the County of Bergen, and it was the Community Development Department, separate department, which had responsibility for submitting what's called a Continuum of Care application every year to HUD, Housing Urban Development. And HUD was channeling a significant sum of money, multiple millions, into services here in Bergen County around homeless shelters and support services. And they were beginning to measure a community's capability of receiving those funds on an ongoing basis by a commitment or compliance with this thing called the 10-year plan to end homelessness. And there was no one chairing it. And community development raised the alarm and said, we have to demonstrate some progress here, otherwise we risk losing some dollars. So I remember being in the room, and there were certainly people in the room more capable than I of being the chair of the 10-year plan, but no one raised their hand, and I wasn't paying attention, and I got selected. So now I'm the chair of the 10-year plan to end homelessness, and I don't mean to be flip about it, but frankly, in my mind, I was thinking this was really just an administrative requirement in order to have a box checked off on the Continuum of Care application to assure that funding into an existing system of services would be maintained. But I began to nose around a little bit, and I read an article called $1 Million Mary, which was written, I think, by Gladwell, wasn't it? Malcolm Gladwell in the New Yorker, which spoke about how a homeless individual in Denver, Colorado, had been tracked by the police, I think it was, and others, and it was determined that in the space of a year, he had consumed $1 million worth of healthcare services by something like 52 trips to the emergency room. There was another article about someone in San Diego discovering that the amount of money spent on providing services to folks in homeless shelters on a per annum basis, you could have bought a condo on the beach in San Diego for less expense than was being incurred in terms of trying to shelter people in the homeless shelter system in San Diego. So while doing this research, I discovered something called Housing First, which was this concept of actually solving homelessness by putting someone in an apartment first. Duh. Now that seemed to be counter to all of the impulses and the instincts and the current systems in terms as Sam described, which was providing an extraordinary level of service to try to alter someone's path and have them earn their way, if you will, out of the shelter system into permanent housing solutions. So found Sam and found Pathways to Housing on the internet, called him up. He was gracious enough to say, come on over, because seeing is believing. And that day or that morning that I went over to East Harlem was an absolute revelation. Sam was practicing, operating, taking people who were chronically homeless, the folks that were pushing the shopping carts down the middle of Broadway, and taking them to apartments. At that time, that was a hard kind of a concept to hold in your mind, just totally counterintuitive. Went over, met with Sam, heard him speak, but had to see. Followed one of his ACT teams, Assertive Community Treatment Teams, walked over to East Harlem, met individuals who were living in apartments and thriving. Tried to understand how are you getting landlords to agree to take people who are chronically homeless and install them. And Sam pointed out that landlords were thrilled to have Pathways to Housing clients as tenants. In fact, called him and said, do you have any more that you can send over? For a couple of reasons. One is that there was a ready rent payment that arrived on a timely manner every month. And secondly, if there was any issue with the tenant, the landlord had recourse, had someone call, could call Sam, had the ACT team to flood the zone if there was an issue with the tenant. Furthermore, the other insight was that all of the behaviors that you or I might find significantly off-putting around an individual who's chronically homeless tended to moderate. Wow. Here was the magic bullet. I was flabbergasted. Drove back over the George Washington Bridge, now really kind of passionate that there is actually a solution to what I had imagined was an intractable, insoluble condition of life. The homeless would always be among us. I came back to Bergen County and tried to be a bit of an apostle in a rally. Sam quoted an Italian economist. I'll quote another Italian, I guess, philosopher, Machiavelli, who said there is nothing more difficult to achieve than a new order of things. So coming back over and now trying to fulfill my obligation as the chair of the 10-year plan, then began the struggle to try to change conventional thinking or disrupt conventional thinking around services to homeless people and how actually to solve homelessness. And being a bit of a, I guess, sort of sacrificial lamb, if you will, on this to a certain extent. By that I mean, being the person who raised his hand and said, maybe we should try something different. That gave an opportunity for the idea to kind of gain some oxygen. And there was some real significant resistance to the idea because it does challenge the thinking, the conventional thinking around how you solve homelessness. But thanks to Clark's effort, who was retained by the county to help and breathe life into it, we were able to change the system. And I wouldn't want to suggest, and now Housing First has been fully implemented, and Julia, I think, will dive into some more detail about its success, and it has been extraordinarily successful. And successful against the backdrop of the Great Recession. So its success somewhat masked by the fact that while people have been housed on a permanent basis and very successfully, the numbers in terms of folks now newly homeless, have grown significantly. So there's no victory lap. In fact, there's a sober sort of a reality that there's much more that needs to be done. And Lisa talked about the troubling and increasing numbers around family homelessness, which are attributable directly to the effects of the Great Recession. So the work is not done, but the system of service has been transformed. The work yet to be done, I believe, is to continue the transformation, to create a single point of entry, a collaborative model that intersects with families before homelessness sets in. Because right now it seems that many of the services that will intervene with families will be intervention after crisis has occurred, and to try to move upstream to see if we can intersect with families before the eviction notice, before the foreclosure notice, before the crisis occurs is the next struggle. And towards that end, we're taking some responsibility. Our organization is as the administrators of the FEMA dollars, the FEMA funds that come into it. And by the way, still waiting to find out what that number is. We've been trying to work to reform the system, reform the system, in order to become that more collaborative single point of entry, in order to try to get ahead of the curve in terms of solving family homelessness. Because I believe, and I'm sure you all do as well, that no child in the community, much less an individual, or experiencing even one night homelessness. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Clark.